Here with Kiki, who was your previous panelist, and it's a great pleasure for me to chair this second panel, looking at forthcoming Latin American exhibitions in London. We are missing one of our panelists, Iwona, Blazwick, director of the Whitechapel Gallery. We know she's on her way, so just bear with us. But in the meantime, we still have a very distinguished panel here, starting on your left with Polly Staple, who is the director of the CHISENHALE Gallery in the east of London. Then we have Lydia, who is a curator at the BARBICAN in London, and our token man. It seems that we only have one in each of the panels, and this is Adrian Locke, who works at the Royal Academy. And they each have exhibitions that have already started. In the case of Polly, the Mexican exhibition, Mariana, Castillo, Deball. The exhibition is on until, I think, August or second, until mid-July. Lydia's exhibition starts at the end of June. It's Leandro, Erlich, the Argentine artist. And Adrian's exhibition starts on the 2nd of July, I think 3rd of July. And will be on until September, and it's entitled Mexico, a Revolution in Art, 1910 to 1940. So perhaps maybe before we discuss each and every one of your projects in more details, perhaps we can have a sort of a view, a sort of a quick round of opinion as to why there is such a sort of a flurry of Latin American exhibitions in, it seems, all of the main institutions in London in the next 6 months. The Tate, the Whitechapel has several Latin American artists, the Royal Academy, Barbican, Hayward, CHISENHALE. I mean, it's quite remarkable. Do you have any view, Polly, maybe as to why there is such a renewed interest in Latin America at the moment?
Is that on? That's on. I felt Hans Ulrich's answer to a similar question was quite interesting, actually. I think there's something about the time we've been brought together here at the art fair, but I think I was actually trying to think about answering this question before, because you gave it to us before, and I couldn't come up with a totally precise answer. I think there are some great enthusiasts in London for South American art, so I think there's a hungry audience for that art. I was actually going to talk in relation to Mariana's show, actually about the specifics of why we invited her to be doing an exhibition at CHISENHALE, and actually it partly relates to working with a previous artist from South America called Amalia Pica, who's from Argentina. And actually when we work with artists, there's often not always, but there's sometimes almost there's a baton that gets handed on from artist to artist, in that you work with one artist and you meet their friends, you discuss art with them, you share interests and knowledge. And actually Amalia Pica introduced Mariana's work to me. And so there was almost like a handover. So I can only answer from a personal position. And also having, it relates also to a broader context to do with CHISENHALE, which I'll speak about when I speak about her work, in terms of bringing artists from outside of the UK to our exhibition space. But I'll speak some more about that.
Maybe Lydia, you want to take over? Because we also have a fabulous exhibition of Damian Ortega, we mentioned earlier, the Freud Museum, and now you're showing the Argentine Leandro Erlich. So.
Well, I think at the Barbican we periodically do shows with Latin American artists. A number of years ago now we hosted a very big Tropicalia exhibition that looked at Brazilian artists from the 60s to the present, and focusing mostly on the period of the military dictatorship. But I mean, it wasn't planned in any way. I think these things come in cycles, and this was, you know, we had approached Leandro about doing a show, and it came up, the timing was right, and he had a perfect idea. So it does, I think, very much come out of dialogues. You know, sometimes they might be very short term, other times they gestate over years. This does follow a few years on from a Damian Ortega exhibition, although that was quite independent of this one.
And you, Adrian, the Royal Academy hasn't been as keen on Latin America lately, so...
You're right. There's only ever been one show of what one might call modern Latin American art at the Royal Academy before, and that was the Gelman collection that was shown in 1990, and the Royal Academy has absolutely no real track record of working on this material whatsoever. But I think that, amongst other things, there's also the fact that the world is just so incredibly global now, and the eye that one casts across the world can see into parts of it that were not so visible or attainable or achievable or reachable before, and that's changed a lot. And also the fact that, you know, the museum landscape, gallery landscape has changed tremendously, and we're all having to look harder and harder for more imaginative exhibitions. We can't all continue trotting out the same kind of exhibitions that have happened in the past. They're increasingly difficult and expensive to do, and our audiences are hungry for new material.
You will certainly get some with your show. I think, Polly, your presentation is on the screen, so maybe it may be a good time for you to talk to us about this exhibition of Mariana, which is in there.
Thank you. Could you put the slides on so they just rotate? That's really good. So this leads on from your question in a way, which is at the CHISENHALE Gallery we work primarily on solo projects with artists, and they're primarily commissions of new work. And in the past couple of years we've actually worked with a high number of London-based artists, and this year, in a change from that, this year we're working in our exhibitions, in our main exhibitions program, just with artists who are actually not based in the UK. And this is a very conscious decision on my part as the artistic director of the institution to bring in work from artists who are not working in London. Now, if you're commissioning work with artists and supporting them to make new work, then you need to establish the right conditions for them to be able to make a new piece of work. If they're living in Mexico City, this is perhaps not they're quite far away from London, so you're not necessarily going to have the best dialogue that you could achieve with an artist's studio just around the corner. So when I was planning the program, I thought I wanted to work with Mariana. She's originally from Mexico City. She actually lives in Berlin and works between Mexico City and Berlin. And even though she lives in Berlin, which is not so far away, it still means that she's not here in the UK, and we wanted to establish quite a close dialogue. So, and this is this show, which opened it opened just at the end of May. Actually came out of about 2 years of pre-planning. So there's an organisation in Glasgow, just outside of Glasgow, called Cove Park, which is they run a residency program in the sort of hillsides outside of Glasgow. And we partnered with Cove Park and the Centre for Contemporary Art in Glasgow to establish the funding and context for Mariana to come and be in the UK. Now, Glasgow isn't also in London, but it's closer than Mexico City, let's say. But also Mariana had very particular interest in that, and this relates to the work which she made and is in the show. So this is a show with a artist born in Mexico who lives in Berlin, who did a residency in just outside of Glasgow and is presenting a show in London. So that is perhaps also answering your question, Catherine, in terms of an international dialogue. There are many stories and narratives that I could introduce you to about Mariana's work. I hope that you will come and see the show itself. It's on until mid-July. Part of Mariana's interest is in the relationships between the narratives that we may tell about art and objects and the objects themselves. And this particular show looks at the relationship between artworks and artifacts. Now, one of the key stories which relates to Mariana's, she came to the UK to do a two-part residency. She was particularly interested in the work of the anthropologist Alfred Maudsley, who some of you I'm sure will be familiar with, whose collection of papier-mâché casts of artifacts from Mexico are in the collection of the British Museum. And in the 19th century. Maudsley went to Mexico, and there's so many stories and so much research that Mariana has done. I will just introduce you to a few of the themes. But Alfred Maudsley went to Mexico, and rather than bringing back the original artifacts, he is recognized as an inverted commas good anthropologist and archaeologist, because he brought back casts of the original objects, leaving the original objects intact. These casts are in the British Museum. The technique that he used is called paper squeeze, and Mariana, in making her works, which are in the exhibition, used the same method that Maudsley did. Another layer to Mariana's, so when Mariana came to the UK, she spent some time at the British Museum, so we facilitated that for her. She also spent some time in Edinburgh looking at the artist Edoardo Paolozzi's archive, because Edoardo Paolozzi himself actually makes reference in several of his works to Maudsley's archive from the British Museum. So Mariana, who actually studied printmaking, is very interested in, she talks, and if you come and see the show, she's produced a booklet to accompany the show, and there's also an interview with her where she talks very eloquently about all of the references that she's interested in, but she particularly talks about her own history as a printmaker. She studied printmaking at art school, and the relationship between the object that you may make a print from and the imprint that it leaves. And she, in making her own objects, this is actually a print that she made. I'm just, if we wait for one of the images to come up. Oh, now could you just, in the exhibition, she juxtaposes plaster casts that she has made using old-fashioned plaster cast techniques, with prints that she's made, which relates to some of the artifacts that Maudsley was exploring. And you can just see in the corner these casts that Mariana has made of trees in Mexico, Costa Rica, Cove Park, Scotland, and Berlin. And in amongst all these objects that she has made, there are also, an image is going to come up in a moment, of these racks with images from her research. Photographic images from the research that she made in the British Museum and in Paolozzi's archive. If you come and see the exhibition, which is very elegantly installed by Mariana, what I think is the achievement of this show, and this is my final point, is that she manages somehow to very successfully present to the audience her research, as well as these new objects that she has made, building on the legacy of Paolozzi and Maudsley. So also to sort of go back to Catherine's question about these kind of international exchanges, I think Mariana herself in her body of work is working through those networks and historical relationships.
Yes, I think because the show is already open, I think last week or 2 weeks ago I was able to see it, and I think what is fascinating is that it's very British, through her work with Maudsley and the British Museum archive, but also very intrinsically Mexican, especially taking over the tradition of prints. And actually there is a very interesting connection between you and the exhibition that Adrian is preparing at the Royal Academy, that is actually going to look at the origin of these prints in part, I suppose, but I don't want to take over your presentation. But can we come back to you afterwards, Polly? And I think maybe it would be a great time to talk about Adrian's show forthcoming at the Royal Academy, so opening early July. Well, Iwona, okay. A few minutes to sit down. So Iwona Blazwick, director of the Whitechapel Gallery, who is going to be talking to us about the history and the future of Latin American exhibitions at the Whitechapel. So Adrian, back to the Royal Academy.